Hello and welcome to the Emma's for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian, and we have a wonderful episode for you moms out there who have ever struggled with anger, postpartum rage, any kind of a season of feeling like irritability is your baseline. And I have a feeling that there are a lot of moms, if not almost every mom listening, that is relating to one of those aspects of not responding to our children the way that we would love to. Before we dive into that podcast, I would love to talk about my podcast sponsor, Adele. Adele Natural Cosmetics is a family-run, holistic, small batch, handcrafted, toxin-free skincare and makeup company that produces all of their products here in the US. They believe that transparency is key to great products, which means that you're never going to find ingredients that are hard to pronounce. And they have skincare that is gentle and effective for every skin type. Thanks to their extremely clean, all-natural ingredients, people that use their products have enjoyed things like fewer eczema flare-ups and less acne, redness, and overall, they're just experiencing calmer, happier skin. Two of their products that people absolutely love are their lotion bar, which is perfect for dry or irritated skin or just restoring moisture after a long, hot summer, and also their facial stick, which is wonderful for sensitive or acne-prone skin. You can use the code MSForMama, that's MISFORMAMA, for 25% off your first order at AdeleNaturalCosmetics.com. I also want to highlight our brand new podcast sponsor, the Kings Ridge Elderberries. All Kings Ridge elderberry products are made on their small family farm in Indiana, and you can get everything from their delicious elderberry syrup, and I do mean delicious. This is the tastiest elderberry syrup my kids and I have ever tried, and it helped us a lot during cold and flu season, to cold pressed juice, to raw elderberries, directly from tkrfarm.com. And you can use the code MAMA10 for 10% off your entire order. All of their elderberry products are packed with antioxidants and vitamins to help boost your immune system this cold and flu season. So use the code MAMA10 for 10% off at tkrfarm.com. Taste the difference, help push back the curse. That's tkrfarm.com. All right, friends, we are back with another wonderful episode that I think is going to be very practically helpful for you. Today, I have on the podcast Elizabeth Andreyevskey. I think I said your last name correct.
You did.
Good. We were just talking before we got started about the fact that I think we both do, but I try to get people's unusual last names correct because it's so rare that people get my last name correct. Elizabeth, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Of course. So Elizabeth is an anger management coach for moms. And I think a lot of you just sat up and went, "Ooh, I could use one of those." And I know this from personal experience because when I did something called the Gentleness Challenge after I had my 8th baby, which is going on 6.5 years ago, I had so many moms that immediately joined the social media account that I started and were like, me too. I'm struggling with rage. I'm struggling with impatience and harsh words and unkind speech. So just know that if that's you today, mama, you are not alone, and that is not the end of the hope. Just not being alone is not the hope. Instead, there are practical and very boots on the ground ways to help with what you're struggling with. And Elizabeth is today here to talk about those things. So welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me. So my name is Elizabeth. I am a mom of 4. My oldest is 13, and then 10 and 8, so 3 boys, and then a toddler who is 4 years old, a girl who literally thinks she's the princess because daddy calls her the princess. And my boys will tease her and call her, "You're a toddler." And she's like, "No, I'm a princess. Daddy says I'm a princess." We live in Jacksonville, Florida. My husband and I have been married for 16 years. I'm a believer. I grew up in the church. I speak Russian. That is my first language. And my journey began with anger in my motherhood. I think I really experienced the first time rage was when I had my second son. With my first one, I had like frustrations and, moments when the baby doesn't go to sleep and all the things, but he was just a typical baby. But my second one was a colic baby. And I don't know if any mom that is listening that has experience with a colic baby, you know how challenging that is and how emotionally um, drained you are hearing a baby cry and then feeling incapable of trying to calm the baby down, how frustrating that is. And then you have other kiddos that need you at the same time. And so my first experience where I felt like out of control, like rage, there's different levels, right? You're just kind of annoyed, frustrated, then you're getting kind of more angry, and then there's rage where you feel out of control. And for me, that was when my baby was a couple weeks old and he was crying a lot. I finally calmed him down and put him in the swing. And then my toddler, who was 3 at that time, comes up to him, picks up his little finger, and just bites it
Oh,
for
no.
some unknown reason. And I don't think like I've ever experienced like out of control rage before that. And I just screamed. I did not just like yell at my toddler. I like screamed in his face, "What did you do? Why? Why would you do that?" And I smacked him. And like it wasn't just like, "Oh, I need to, I was trying to spank him in a biblical way." It was like out of control. I'm so mad that you did that. And it's like that wrath is coming out on him. And right away, filled with so much shame, so much remorse. How could I have ever done this? This isn't me. I don't want to be like that. Like crying, praying, like, God, what's wrong with me? Why did I do that? And that was my first experience. And that wasn't happening that often. But then I had my third. And my husband was a flight attendant at that time and he was traveling a lot. And I've noticed like more of those episodes would come out. And I've even noticed that I would wake up and my baseline was already agitated and frustrated and annoyed. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, especially in the first couple of years of postpartum, but I just did not like feeling like that. Like my
Yeah.
baseline was annoyed and it did not feel good. And during that journey, I ended up sharing some of this with a mentor at that time, and she encouraged me to go to get some like support and counseling. And I did, except I had a really hard time implementing the tools that I was learning in counseling towards parenting because in the heat of the moment, you feel so upset, you feel so triggered, and anything that you've learned just goes out the window. And
Yeah.
then you react with your old sinful automatic patterns. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, one of the biggest kind of pain points for me was literally postpartum rage. I didn't know that postpartum rage was an actual thing, and I'm not one that's very quick to put labels on things, but I knew that the same way you're describing, I was waking up irritated. Like just people asking me, people meaning the ones that lived in the house with me, my children, asking me very reasonable questions felt like an affront, felt offensive. And I was like, you're right. I didn't like the way that I was responding. I didn't recognize, it wasn't that I thought myself incapable of anger or irritation, but if it was going to come, I wanted it to be, there's a reason for this. Like this is unjust. This is unrighteous. Like you're not just asking me where the cereal is, and I'm like, you should already know. I'm like, this is weird. This is off. And that is what led to my starting something called the Gentleness Challenge, which is a 30-day commitment and a spiritual walkthrough and a biblically based like walkthrough of 30 days for only kind speech or biting your own tongue if you can't say something nice at all. So the focus was on speech, but yeah, those emotions I definitely recognize.
Yeah, I did get that challenge like half a year ago and I looked through it and read through it. It was really good. You did a great job. So I encourage your listeners to, go check it out and, purchase it because it's really, really helpful. It's
Okay.
also, there's a lot of, there's the spiritual aspect and then there's the tangible aspect as well. So for me, I still had a hard time implementing the things that I was learning. And until I started to implement proactively spending time with the Lord and having a solid morning routine that really sets me up for success, and taking care of myself, like meeting my basic needs, that's when I started to notice shifts in the way that I was showing up. So what I realized in that season with the little kids, I oftentimes was neglecting my basic needs, like with like sleep, staying up too late because I was scrolling on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's fault, my own. Or literally skipping meals and taking care of my kids, but forgetting to take care of myself, or even just thinking, oh, it's fine for me to skip a meal. It's fine for me to just have coffee and just go throughout my day. And then at 4 p.m., losing my mind with the kids, not realizing it was actually something really practical that I needed to do was to take care of myself. And then the biggest thing is when I noticed is when I started to get up before my kids in the morning. And I know that's not uh, possible for every season when you have newborns. But once your babies start to sleep somewhat through the night, I would say at least half an hour before your kids in the morning, if possible, and use that time to connect with God and do something that really supports you mentally and emotionally and spiritually. So then you have the capacity throughout the day to handle those little frustrations. The baseline wasn't frustrated anymore. It wasn't an 8 out of 10 anymore. It went down to like a 2.
Yeah.
And I could handle with God's help, like things throughout the day when they weren't going my way with the kids or a meltdown or just change of plans or anything like that.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that the goal of that 30 minutes before your kids is a really smart and practical way to approach that. Sometimes even in seasons where that doesn't feel achievable, or you find yourself, quote, failing at that often, maybe you need those extra 30 minutes of sleep. One thing that I've done is to make those 30 minutes about the Lord and about setting good routines in place, even if I have children underfoot. So instead of immediately jumping into making breakfast, you have something set up so that, because you're right, you're going to have to plan for something. It's that kind of a plan. If you don't plan to succeed, then, or if you don't have a plan, then you plan to fail, kind of is the idea. So, if, for example, you're still not consistently achieving waking up 30 minutes ahead of time, at least have something set so that you can have some about like a basket of blocks ready for your toddler to play with, so you can read God's word while they're at your feet, or you can have a really easy breakfast like a Lar bar that they can have so that they're not crying because they're hungry. Because I've often found that the pushback against the getting up early is not necessarily the sacrifice of sleep, although there's that. It's feeling like there's probably going to be an interruption anyway. I get that a lot. And I actually personally have experienced that a lot, where you're
Mhm.
like, ugh, I set my alarm 30 minutes earlier than usual. And the baby woke up earlier. So sometimes if that happens and your plan gets interrupted, having kind of the backup of some systems in place where you could still read God's word with your little one at your feet or in your lap helps you to not feel like, I failed, I lost that time, I might as well give up.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And I tell my kids, you can sit with me, but you need to stay quiet. This is mommy's quiet time in the morning. You're welcome to be with me, but you got to stay quiet. You can grab a Bible, you can grab a book, but you need to sit quietly with me, or you can go back to your bed, or you can go lay down at mom's bed, because that's kind of like a treat that they can go lay down on my bed in the mornings. But yes, sometimes we do need to be adaptive in the mornings. And one of the things that I work a lot with my clients is the perspective of being adaptive to the circumstances that you are given. And oftentimes we have this vision, we'll have this morning routine without the kids. It's going to be peaceful, quiet, and still. And we're praying and we're reading and we're journaling. And then all of a sudden the baby wakes up. Well, this is our chance to be adaptive to the circumstances that God has given to us. So, what would that look like? Maybe it would look like bringing the baby to the living room wherever you're eating, wherever you're having quiet time, and nursing the baby there while you are listening to a devotional, instead of, maybe if you're not able to read, but still trying to find a way to start your day with God. And what I have found is that not even just the spiritual aspect, spending time with the Lord, but even the fact that you're reading, that is super calming to the nervous system. If you're journaling and writing down verses or prayers, that is super calming to the nervous system. Being in quiet and stillness without like go, 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 doing things, all of that is so calming to the nervous system, and it calms your stress levels. So then throughout the day, there's just more capacity to handle tricky and challenging and frustrating situations.
Yeah. And I love what you were saying earlier about some practical steps like not skipping meals. More and more, I think that I am aware of the ways in which a dysregulated nervous system limits my capacity to interact well when things don't go my way. I think I was a big coper when I was younger. I had more energy. I had, maybe better hormonal health, or just like I said, your body just kind of gives you surges of adrenaline or cortisol or whatever it is that you need to power through that moment. But I'm going to tell you, moms, eventually that will slow down some, and you'll have to find that being disciplined in providing what your body needs. So not trying to run on coffee, making sure that you have a balanced plate that has the fats and carbs and protein that your body needs and fiber that your body needs to actually digest things well and give energy to your brain and your muscles and to calm your nervous system, because it's all connected. It
Mm-hmm.
can be kind of overwhelming, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be complicated. And saying like, I cannot survive off the crusts of my kids' PB&Js and still be a nice mom, and it is not selfish to bring my kids along beside me and show them how to make meals that nourish their bodies and help them to steward their souls better as well. So I love that encouragement so practically to be like, drink water, get some protein in your system. Don't turn your phone on first thing in the morning. Get sunlight in your eyes. Our circadian rhythms are very real things, and we do not need blue light messing with that circadian rhythm first thing in the morning. If you find yourself agitated when you first wake up, and you first wake up by sticking a phone in your face and scrolling for 10 minutes, I would kick that habit out the door immediately. There are some really practical things that we can do, because we will not be very adaptive naturally or even with effort if our nervous systems are completely out of whack.
I agree 100%. And even the phone thing, so when we wake up, our stress levels are at its highest. And so if you pick up the phone right away, and the blue light from the phone actually increases your stress levels.
Yep.
Yes, you get the dopamine hit, but it increases your stress levels. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed if I'm like scrolling on my phone and then my kids come in and they need something, I feel a lot more on edge. And
Yeah.
honestly, a little bit annoyed that they are trying to pull me away from that. And that's kind of how the phone works. Yes, it's very, you get the dopamine hit and it's addicting in a way, but it also really messes with you and even frustration levels and how much you can handle throughout the day. So another practical thing that I can suggest to your audience that was really game changing for me was to allow me to be more present and not so distracted and pulled in different directions, and reduce the overstimulation, because that's huge. That's a whole nother thing that can contribute to moms feeling easily frustrated and triggered. That is turning off the phone notifications.
Yeah.
Unless it's like your husband or your kids, you can bypass certain emergency contacts that are messaging you, all the group texts, all the social media,
Yeah.
all the random apps that come with notifications. Nothing shows up on the screen. No buzzing, no ding, nothing, just quiet. And you will be amazed at how much more present you're able to be, and the overstimulation significantly reduces. And that's something that's
Yeah.
in your control. You can't control your kids and the energy levels and how loud they can get, but you can control the phone and the notifications.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why my phone has been on silent for like 4 years now. It makes it really frustrating if I misplace it because we can't call it to find it. But yeah, I don't have any noises coming from my phone, because and I typically do keep it near me, just the nature of my job and things. So I don't miss too many calls. And if I miss a call, I call them back, or things like that. But this idea that we have to be readily available to every beck and call of someone who has a question or a desire to reach us is not realistic. It's not what we were designed for, and it is not historically what has been required of any woman. If we think about the capacity that someone from 100 years ago had, someone was going to have to like send a courier to her house or send her a letter or a telegram if we're talking about really recent kind of um, modern history before we're in the age of the technology boom. And there's something, if we were to think about that, like how many fewer things you would have had cluttering your brain without as much access as people have to us. So it's not, I've seen this social media trend going around. It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know about that, current news scandal. I'm sorry I didn't answer your text immediately. I'm sorry that I missed that notification. We were never meant to have so many streams of information coming into our brain at once. Like, that's not really how God designed us. And I love that. And it gives you so much freedom to say, I'm not being selfish. I'm not ignoring people. I'm being wise and stewarding my capacity well. The one thing I wanted to respond to when you were saying that you can't control your kids' energy levels. That is very true. You wake up with a kid someday with them in your face, ready to go. They're already bickering. Somebody has already dropped a jar of jam while you went to the bathroom, and you have a mess to clean up. Somebody's already peed in their pants. You don't have control over any of those things. However, a thought that occurred to me a little while ago when we were talking about how to pivot and be adaptive when, let's say, your plan to get up 30 minutes early is consistently foiled by the child that hears like your eyelids open and suddenly they're right beside you and want to sit in your lap or play beside you, is if your children have never practiced what it means to be quiet, simply telling them to be quiet probably won't be very productive. So people ask me all of the time how I prepare my kids to participate in a church service without being disruptive when they are very small. And one of the answers to that is you practice. So when you're not in the church service yet, you practice what it's like to sit and quietly color for no other reason than that you need to. So you can set timers and say, okay, for 5 minutes, we're going to practice this. And then you can stretch the timer a little bit longer. Because if you expect a child who has no experience being still at mom's feet and playing with blocks instead of interrupting constantly to suddenly switch and start doing that, or if you expect children who up to this point have been able to use any level of volume inside the house to suddenly lower that volume, so because you're overstimulated, it's kind of an unreasonable request. We have to be willing to put in some work to teach them how to be good humans, because we're learning too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another practical thing that I would really encourage moms in, is if you feel like you're at the mercy of your children's whims, noise levels, or activity levels, you might want to step back and say, have I skipped some training that I might need to start working on now so that this isn't a foreign concept to them?
Yeah, and which makes me think of the what I teach actually, all my clients who have young kids at home, and that is especially if you stay with home with them all day, is making sure you have quiet time in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Even if your kids don't nap anymore, still quiet time. Even on weekends when all of us are home, we have lunch and then there's quiet time in our house.
Yeah.
Everybody for an hour at least, either grab a book you can read, or there's some magnet tiles or Legos, or some 3D pen that they can draw with, or coloring something. But it's paint by stickers. Have you ever heard of those?
Yeah,
Like
I
those
have.
are Yeah, those are such great books. And so paint by stickers, my kids really like those, especially my 8 and up. The kids really like those. And that also gets them to stay quiet for a while. I get the adult version ones of the paint by stickers because it has way more stickers.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
kids version, and then there's
Smart.
the adult ones. And there's so many more pieces, and it keeps them occupied so much longer. But if you don't do quiet time in the house in the afternoons and the kids are with you all day at home, you're missing out for them and for you, because they need that time to decompress from each other and,
Yep.
and just to decompress and recharge. And well, they might not need to recharge, but to decompress and just to have some quiet. And so do you, especially if you're home with the kids. And I am an introvert and highly sensitive person. Like, I naturally get overstimulated easily, and I need time to myself to decompress. And so having quiet time in the afternoon for at least an hour, that has been super game changing for me.
Yeah, that's such a great piece of advice. And I hear probably some moms coming in and saying, wait a minute, you said that they need a break from each other. And I have a really small house and we have like one bedroom and we have our three kids are all in one room. How in the world do I? And I always encourage moms that are in situations like that to look for ways to find a solution rather than look for ways why something won't work. And so, I mean, if you can have one child sitting on the couch reading and you've practiced with them enough to know that this is the child that would actually stay on the couch and read. And then if you can go in your room and you say, hey, buddy, you got this long that you need to be on the couch or in the living room doing this. They don't have to be in the bedroom with the other two kids. You can have one child in the bedroom and you can have one child even in the same room with you. But if that's a child who understands this, like, mama needs a break. You're not able to ask me questions right now. I need you to play with stickers. I'm going to get my work done, take a nap, drink my coffee, scroll on my phone. I mean, if that's a moment where you're like, hey, I need to catch up on the news, or I need to check in and see, on a recipe that I need to look up, or whatever it is that you're doing on your phone, I think that's a great moment to say, this is when I can use this technology without being distracted. But always look for, if you hear a good idea, always look for a way to opt in rather than opt out.
Yes. And another thing I wanted to mention, which I'd love to hear your input on because you have so much more experience with older kids, is unmet expectations, how that can contribute to feeling frustrated and easily triggered as a mom, and even angry, because you have either unrealistic
Sure.
expectations of young kids, just like you even mentioned, to sit still. If you haven't trained them, they're not gonna. And then
Right.
you feel so frustrated that they're not behaving well at church when you need them to sit still and stay quiet. And then you're thinking, what are other people thinking? And then you have all that frustration rise inside of you. And you're just kind of like yanking them or twisting their ear or just pinching them slightly or whatever to get them to listen. Well, that's because you have some unrealistic expectations. First of all, a 2-year old is going to have a hard time, and especially if you haven't trained him, he's going to have even a harder time, especially as a boy, to sit still in an environment like that. And sometimes we have just, maybe it's a realistic expectation of our kids, but our kids or our husband did not meet that expectation. And then we feel really upset. And then we have a negative attitude and a sour face. And that also is something that requires connecting with God and asking God to soften your heart and soften your perspective. Because what I've learned is our thoughts plus our feelings equals our attitude. So if we want to shift our attitude, we need to shift our feelings and we need to shift our thoughts. And who can shift our thoughts? The Lord can shift our thoughts. And we need to pray for God to shift our perspective about the situation so that it can shift like how we feel about the situation, and that is going to shift our attitude when we have unmet expectations. What are your thoughts on that?
100%. Yeah. The reasonable expectations is a great place to start, but sometimes moms don't even know what is reasonable. In fact, that's a really common question that I get asked, like, developmentally, what can I expect from my kids? And that's a great moment where if you have this resource, you can go to a Titus 2 mom who's gone before you, who has children, that has been through these stages that you might not have faced yet, and say, hey, my child does this. Is that something that's an issue of correction, or is that an issue of development? If I expect them to do this, this, and this, and they don't right away, is that something that should be on me? Which my short answer to that would be yes. Anytime you expect a child who has not had enough practice to immediately respond and obey, then you probably need to reevaluate the amount of effort and time and energy that you need to devote to that. Now, there are times when I do have expectations of, like, this morning was a perfect example. I took 5 of my boys, who are my 5 youngest children, ages 10 down to 4, out to the park this morning, and then we had an errand to run, and we were in this is hard to say, a shoe section of the store, and I needed to buy some athletic shoes to replace the ones that I had. And there was a bench, 2 benches actually, and one lady had some of her things on one of the benches, and I wanted my boys to sit on the other bench because there were so many things around and people around that even though I don't necessarily require them to sit perfectly still while we're in a store, in this particular case, it made sense. Now, we've practiced this quite a bit. We've also practiced being wild and free and running around outside and hollering. So they, knowing the difference, they don't have to be buttoned up and perfectly still all the time. But in this particular instance, I said, you need to sit on a bench. Well, there were 2 options, and little boys don't notice when other people's stuff is on a bench. So some of them chose the bench with this lady's stuff on it. And I was like, okay, my expectation is reasonable because I have trained them to do this, but my communication was not good. So I said, oh, not this bench. We all need to sit on this bench. And until mama gets to ask this, sales attendant all the questions that she needs and see if they have the shoe that I need, you may not get up. And so they all lined up and they did great. It wasn't perfect. There was some wiggling and, ear pulling or whatever, but they really did great. They weren't hopping up and jumping around, but that's because we've practiced a whole lot. And then when I realized, oh, I have a problem with my communication, I didn't tell them which bench to sit on. I'm the one that should have communicated more clearly. Then you fix that. And you give reminders and you give grace, but also hold that boundary really firmly. When you see one of them start to get up, no, remember, mama said not until we're done with this. You can go and stand beside them and just put your hand on the shoulder and say, sorry, bud, we're not moving right now. You've got 2 more minutes. A 5-year-old doesn't know what 2 more minutes means, but he does know that there's an end in sight, right?
Yes.
So I think the fair expectations and then the good communication should go hand in hand. I have 2 toddler episodes where I talk about this and how it helps us to communicate and train our toddlers better when we understand what to expect, and also when we are clear to let them know what we expect and make sure that they've heard us. And then exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes we have done all of the training and we have done all of the communicating and we have been reasonable and they still don't do what they're supposed to do. And one, we need to remember that we're like this too. Sometimes when people are like, I can't believe my child still disobeys after 2 years of working on this, I want to go, is there anything in your life that you still struggle with to obey God in? that you've been working on for 20 years, maybe. So we can probably relate to that. But 2, we also know that discipline is so important and that the Lord disciplines those whom he loves and those whom he calls sons and daughters. And so we shouldn't just simply throw up our hands and find ourselves in a constant cycle of frustration that when the expectations that are reasonable are not met, we do nothing about it. And then it happens again, and we find our anger escalating because we haven't actually taken the time to follow through on discipline for our kids.
Yes, yes. Very well said. Very well said. And I wanted to ask you, have you noticed when you feel stressed out, if that affects your tolerance levels with the kids?
If that affects my tolerance levels?
Well, just like capacity, like do you feel
Oh, yes,
easily triggered?
100%. Yeah, in fact, there are times that I will simply ask my children not to ask me questions in the car until we get home, when we have like a couple minutes left to get home, because I'm thinking about things. There's something really, really heavy on my mind, and I'm trying to keep it all in my brain. I'm trying to remember that when I get home, I have to take the meat out to thaw. And my mom called, and I'm not going to call her back till I get home, but I need to remember to call her back. And shoot, I forgot to make that appointment. I'm driving and I can't make the reminder in my phone right now, but I need to remember to put the reminder in my phone. You have so many things going on in your brain. Your stress levels are rising, and your kids are like, hey, mom, hey, mom, hey, mom, look at my hair. Look, I put a clothespin in my hair. Hey, mom, look at my hair. And then another kid is like, can we listen to this song? I really like this worship song. Can we play this worship song? And you find yourself going inward, trying to remember everything that you have. And they're all legitimate things. You're not being selfish. You're not being self-focused. You're just trying to be a good mom and a good manager of your home. And if you keep ignoring your children, they will keep escalating unless you have them so well trained that they only ever ask things once. And I don't know too many kids that do that, even if they do understand. They have that impulse, disorder that all children have, where, if they don't get a response, they're going to assume that you didn't hear them. So they're going to keep
Yep.
asking, right? And so I think one of the best ways to restore your capacity is just to have a reasonable request. Hey guys, we're going to be home in 4 minutes, and mama is trying to remember, and being transparent with them. Sometimes I think there's an impression that mama looks like she needs to have everything together all the time and that she never struggles to remember anything. Or so there's a balance between laying burdens on our kids that only we should bear and being transparent with them about the things that we have going on that make it difficult for me to listen right now. And kids are really accommodating most of the time. When you're like, we have 4 minutes till we get home, I'm trying to remember 4 things. A really good idea in this instance also would be to assign a thing to remember to each child.
Oh, I love
So
that.
I need to put this on my to-do list. Nola, will you help me remember to do this? Simon, will you help me remember to call Softa back? Because she called me and I don't have time to talk like a whole conversation, but I need to remember to call her after I make this to-do list. And then your kids are able to have agency and participating with you, helping bear your burdens, which is something that we're supposed to do as believers and as families. And they also have something to occupy their minds instead of just requiring something from you. And then you can also say to them, I do see your hair. That's cute. Anything that your brain actually did catch, you can acknowledge really quickly and kind of like, it's almost like clearing a tab in your brain. Or if you can't acknowledge it, you can say, also, I want to hear your story, but until we get home and I get these things out of my brain, I won't be able to focus. Please tell me when I finish this.
Mhm.
And kids will honor that. And if they don't, it might become a discipline issue because that's not fair on their part, especially if you've been faithful to communicate. And you may be like, I'm so glad your brain works well enough, Abby, that you can do all of those things. But it's the same as everything else we're talking about. It's practice. When you start recognizing those moments when you're really triggered by your kids asking you questions and your tolerance levels are going down as your stress levels go up, that's when you actually say, what could I practically do to fix this? And start practicing it one little habit at a time until you have those things in place so that instead of escalating and blowing up, you're able to go, oh, right, I'm supposed to ask them to help me with my to-do list and I'm supposed to ask them to be quiet for 4 minutes. That's doable.
Yes, I love that. And like delegating a task to the kids. And for me, my kids are old enough that I can communicate with them like, hey, I feel really overwhelmed right now. I need like 10 minutes of, settling things down, figuring things out, and then you can ask me what you wanted to
Yeah,
ask. Because
so
sometimes
good.
they want a favor and you just walk through the door and you are feeling frazzled, you're feeling overwhelmed, the house is a little bit messy, and you need a moment to yourself. And just instead of snapping at them and yelling at them, this is a great idea to just communicate with them like, hey, I'm feeling XYZ and I need blank. Would you please help me with that? Or would you, please wait 5-10 minutes and then come back to me in a little bit? And I do the same thing with my kids. When my husband walks through the door, they always like want to throw things at him like, dad, I need you to do this. Can you do this? I'm like, he just walked through the door.
Yeah,
Give him some time. This is not the best time to ask for favors. Like
yeah,
he needs to calm down, decompress a little bit, eat, and then, and then you can ask him
yeah.
for favors. So one of the things that I wanted to share with your audience that I think will be so helpful, when we mentioned earlier on, when we have those automatic reactions under stress, when we feel triggered and we go back to automatic ways of reacting, even though we've learned that that's not helpful, that that's sinful, that that's destructive, and we feel so triggered in the moment, we just go back to that reaction. One of the ways that I have found that's been so helpful with the clients that I work with, it is we practice in a journal ahead of time how to positively respond to a situation that you find being triggered over and over again. Maybe it's when you set a boundary with your toddler about treats and your toddler melts down and you tend to scold them and raise your voice at them, or maybe yank them or react in a way that is not aligned with who God is calling you to be, that is sinful and destructive. And you feel so much remorse and guilt over it. And you want to change that, asking God how to respond better in a way that is godly and Christ-like. Because right now you know what not to do. We got to teach your brain what to do and actually practice it on paper in like I have my clients do it like only 5 minutes a day, but you take a scenario that feels so triggering for you. Like I had a client that she had a toddler that wanted to buckle herself when you get in the car. And she didn't think she could buckle herself. And she would always try to buckle her toddler on her own. And that would create a lot of tension and frustration because her mind is like, I don't have time for this. I don't want to deal with this. She can't do this. And then, the toddler's screaming. She had to be a little bit rough to get the toddler in the car seat. And it's like all this tension. And she gets in the car feeling so frustrated and triggered. And one of the things that we needed to do was journal proactively what you're going to do differently. Instead of, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. It's like, no, what are you going to do? When we come up to the car, I'm going to let my toddler climb into the car seat. Well, first of all, I had to teach her that, hey, this is normal for a 2.5-year-old that wants to buckle herself in the car seat. And then I remind myself, I have time for this. I have time for this. This will only take a few minutes.
Yeah.
And I stand there, patiently wait until my daughter buckles her car seat. And if she can't do it in a couple of minutes, I ask her if she wants my help. And then I buckle her in. And like you're teaching your brain what you're going to think about the situation, what you're going to say, and what you're going to do that is Christ-like, that is aligned with the mom that God is calling you to be, that really honestly feels good when you show up as that type of mom. Because when we react in sinful ways, we feel really crummy on the inside.
For sure.
Right. And when we show up in ways that is loving, compassionate, understanding, kind, empathetic, that feels really good to us as moms. And so teaching your brain on paper what to do. So then in the moment, it's so much easier to access it because you're like, oh, I remember. Your brain is like, oh, we just practiced it this morning. And I remember what to do when my toddler's melting down or what to do when my teenager disrespects me and says a snarky comment instead of reacting in a way that you don't like.
Yeah. And I love that. And having your mind, it's renewing your mind with truth, which is what scripture calls us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And taking every thought captive to the lordship of Jesus Christ, which is also what scripture calls us to do. And I would maybe add to that communication element is key, even for small children, as long as you're able to do it in a developmentally appropriate way. So let's say that you genuinely are very late. It happens, right? And you were supposed to be somewhere in 10 minutes and you've got a 20-minute drive or a 30-minute drive and you are stressed and your cortisol levels are high and you are already feeling like a failure. And you maybe feel like even with journaling that you're going to stand there calmly and tell yourself you have time for this. You really don't. I think one of the best things that you can also prepare yourself to do would be to say to your toddler, hey, we are in a hurry today. Mama needs to buckle your car seat today as we leave. But when we get back in the car after our appointment, it will be your turn to buckle. This is Mama's turn to buckle, and then it's going to be your turn to buckle. Okay? And one of the things that I find, especially with small children, but even with older kids, is a verbal pact is so important with kids. Like we're in Texas, we say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, that kind of thing. Yes, mom. Okay, mom. Yes, mama. Whatever version of it is. I actually unintentionally created a really funny one with my current, they're not toddlers anymore. They seem like toddlers to me, but my youngest, I say, do you understand me? And I think for the longest time, they had no idea what that phrase meant other than that it was a verbal pact. They heard the question in my voice, so they would answer it back and they say, understand me. That's their response. But it's like you've shaken hands. Okay. Yes, we're agreed. We're going to do this. And it actually helps a lot. If you just toss a command at a child and walk away and don't get the response that you want, that's a really quick way to escalate your emotions. But if you let them know what you're struggling with, even at a young age, we're in a hurry. I'm going to put your shoes on. We're getting in the car. I would do a lot of okay with one of my children. I'd say, I can't tie your shoes right now because I'm holding bags of groceries, but I will, as soon as I put them down, okay. And she would say, okay, and it was like, we're in agreement. We've shaken hands. We can do this. So sometimes I feel like that's one thing you can prepare to do as well, is when you pivot, make sure that you're telling someone that you're pivoting instead of just doing it and then having their reaction be negative.
Oh, yes. I love that you mentioned that, because we have this too. Like, we have a vision of how we're going to do the next few steps, and they have a vision that they're going to get to the car and buckle themselves, or they have a vision that you are going to help them with the shoes, and then all of a sudden you can't in that moment, and so they start melting down, especially like little toddlers. I have a 4-year-old. If she opens the fridge and she grabs the whipping cream, she has a vision in her head that she's going to get that whipping cream. And if all of a sudden I say, no, this is not going to happen, there's a lot more likely to have a meltdown, versus like preparing her ahead of time. It's like whipping cream is saved for, pancakes on Saturday morning. And as she's walking to the fridge, if I can catch her, or just even preparing them ahead of time, when you're going to redirect something, when they like things a certain way. Oh, we're going to drive this path today. We're going to go on this walk. So then they can mentally prepare. They're way less likely to have the big, maybe meltdown or explosion that can easily happen with toddlers. That resilience.
Sure. Yeah. And we appreciate this as adults too.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate it when people don't just say, we're doing this now. And you're like, but we've never done that. This isn't what I'm so thrown for a loop, and I feel kind of yanked around. And whereas adults and children are not the same in our capacity levels, our mental development, and our authority levels and responsibility that comes along with that authority. So I want to be careful not to equate the two, meaning that we treat adults the exact same way we treat children and vice versa. That would go very wrong. I'd be like, hi, did you go potty, to an adult? Of course I don't say that, or, give a long list of executive functions to a 3-year-old who only caught one of them. That would be terrible, even if an adult could handle it. So I'm not quite equating the two, but sometimes we do need to be reminded that this courtesy that we're offering our 3-year-old is just a common human courtesy. It's not necessarily something that's unreasonable to offer them, even though they're very small and maybe can't understand all of the reasons behind it.
Yes, I agree with that.
Well, Elizabeth, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I love that you are out there giving moms resources that are practical, but also steeped in God's word to help them go beyond feeling controlled by their rage and their anger and their overreactions. Tell us a little bit more about where my audience can find you and your resources.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I do have a free training for moms. It's called How to Become a Patient Mom, so you stop screaming over spilled milk. And it's 10 things that you can start implementing today that are going to increase your patience and increase your capacity levels as a mom. And then you can find me at emotionallyhealthylegacy.com. I have my coaching services over there. I have a 12-week intensive coaching program for moms that struggle specifically with out of control anger, Christian moms. And then I have a podcast called Emotionally Healthy Legacy. And so it's all on my website, emotionallyhealthylegacy.com.
Perfect. That is so great to know that there are resources out there that are sound and biblical for moms. And we really appreciate you sharing with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a great day. If you enjoyed the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends, or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.